Hi, friends. It's Will Parker here from Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. We are excited to announce that we are approaching our 400th episode. Can you believe it? To make this milestone even more special, we'd love to hear from you. If this podcast has inspired, helped, or encouraged you, would you consider sharing your thoughts with us? It's easy. Find a quiet spot, record a 60-second voice memo on your phone, and email it to will@williamdparker.com. We are eager to hear why the show resonates with you, your favorite moments, or anything you find particularly thought-provoking or funny. Thanks in advance for your contributions, and thank you for doing what matters. Principal Matters Podcast, episode 399. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, I'm back with my co-host, Jen Schwanke, Deputy Superintendent at Dublin City Schools in Dublin, Ohio, and the author of 4 great books. And Jen, golly, this recording is going to be released in June, which means some people are like, freedom! And then some people are like, I'm almost there. And then for my listeners who, I mean, we have listeners in Australia, they're just like in the middle of winter. So,
right.
So who knows when they'll hear this, but welcome to whatever time this is that you're listening to this. Jen, quick questions before we get started. What's like one thing you're already like excited about as you look towards summer? Are you guys planning anything exciting?
I just look forward to the different pace. I think that is one of the great things about this job we do is it is so seasonal. And in the summer, I get up and exercise in the morning, I know like you do. And so I like taking my runs in the light when it's light out. And I like having a few extra minutes to enjoy my coffee before I start my day. So we are going to do some traveling. We're going to take my family to Maine this year. We try to go to a different region every year. So we'll be up seeing you Mainers that are listening.
You know, one of my favorite things to do in the mornings when the sun is finally up is I love sunrise because, and you probably know this too, I'm sure it's not unique to my backyard, but right when the sun's coming up, there's just like this burst of of volume among the birds. Like they just start, they're all welcoming the morning. I used to think it was just roosters because I grew up on a farm, and now I realize like all birds do that. And you're gonna think I'm a weirdo, but this morning I actually did get to run in the light, and when I got back, I was standing under our tree in our front yard, and these birds were just singing and so I started trying to whistle along with them, and I saw this middle school girl walk by. She looked at me like, "You have lost your mind, man."
Right.
And she's right. I have lost my mind, but I love that time of year. And this summer we're going to take a trip to the UK. We have our third daughter, Katie, is graduating from university in Wales, and so we're going to try to get the whole family together for this outing, Jen. So we're still pulling all the details together, but I'll keep you posted. So
Oh,
I'm going to,
that's so fun.
so that'll be a blast. For those of you that may be attending the national principals conferences within a ESP or NASSP, I always love to give them a shout out. They're hosting that this year in July in Nashville, Tennessee. So check that out. Sadly, I won't be able to be there this time because that's Katie's graduation. But I know there's going to be some great summer learning happening too. And Jen, I know you're going to do some summer PD as well. I'm
Yep,
guessing.
and I'll be at NASSP in Nashville. So come see me there. If you Will won't be there, but I will represent us both. How about that?
Yay. Well, Principal Matters listeners, this week's topic is actually going to be around answering questions again, like we did the last time you heard Jen and I in an episode. And so let me set the stage. We're going to talk this time about boundary setting for leaders and educators. And when I had the opportunity to do some training in North Carolina back in the spring, I gathered questions from all the principals, assistant principals in this case, in the room, and as exit tickets. And I brought them back, and I began to just kind of separate them into categories and combine some of those questions together. So, Jen, here's the question I wanted to set on with you for today's episode. What strategies can be employed to set clear boundaries in professional settings, both as a new leader and in interactions with others, to ensure respect and equity without escalating tensions? So again, This is a mouth. This is a mouthful.
So,
But
listeners, what Will does is he combines questions and makes them like 15 layers deep. So that there you go. That's a question we're
well,
going to dig into today.
it is. And if listeners haven't figured it out, Jen and I never answer more than one question because we take so long. So I just decided these questions are going to just go ahead and expand for this entire episode. So, what strategies can be employed to set clear boundaries in a professional setting, both as a new leader and in interactions with others to ensure respect and equity without escalating tensions? So Jen, let's start there. Let's first talk about boundaries for just a minute, because I know you've had some thoughts on that.
Right. And again, listeners, I'm laughing because whenever Will and I do this with a question, I get about to word number 5 and I'm like, well, wait, what do you mean by that? So yeah, let's talk about boundaries. And again, the origin of this question is very interesting to me. I think the first thing we have to define, we meaning school leaders, when we say we need to set boundaries, we have to really truly think about what we mean by boundaries. That word in my mind conjures up images of borders, walls, limits. And I don't think that's what principles mean. I don't think they mean, how can I build walls around myself at all? I read somewhere, and I so wish I could quote this, but I read somewhere that boundaries are really teaching others how to treat us. And
Mm,
that resonates with me because I think many principals are like, how I know I can't let this job eat me alive. I know I can't be a trunk filled with woodpeckers where they just peck, peck, take, 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 take. So I think what principals mean by this is, how can I maintain my soul, myself, my who I am, have time for my family, have balance without making it seem like I'm building walls. And so I would like to replace boundaries in many cases with words like protocols, norms, practices, um, how we do things, because that use of a different word feels less us versus them, me versus them. Again, the word boundary implies a barrier. So I'm going to be here protecting myself from all you people, right? That's not what we want. So I think it becomes a need to ask yourself, what do you mean when you wonder about setting boundaries? What aren't you getting? What are you scared you won't get? What do you hope for? And then go from there.
mm. Now, I believe this question was written in the context of assistant principals who are considering taking on the role of principal in a new building. So you can kind of sense in this question
Mhm.
the that anxiety of, okay, I'm
Right.
the new person. So how do I create these clear boundaries? And I'm so glad you started there, Jen, with what do you mean by that? Because I would bring that back to, for any leader, back to your classroom experience and ask you that same question whenever you are encountering a new group of students. And you can apply this with the class. You can also apply this with your staff. But how do you, like you said, how do you set those protocols and norms for, this is how we do class? This is how we do, this is how we do school? Because when you're setting those norms, you're collectively agreeing that this is the way things happen here. Now, you could dictate that. You could say, welcome to this class or welcome to this school. Here's the list of expectations we have for you. And that's pretty much, I would say, the traditional way most of us have approached school. I've been on the other end of that as a student. I've been in schools, and I'll give you the example of student principals and student handbooks. One of the most common things I see people do is they gather all the kids into a big assembly and they say, here's the student rules. And they just go over the rules. Everybody signed, you received this. Now go to class. Now, you may have covered yourself in terms of making sure that you've documented every person has been given their practice, that you can say that that's all happened. You're in compliance. But how much more effective would it be? And I'll just give you an example from practice, Jen. This is not prescription, but it's just an example. But how much more effective would it be if you set up instead a series of small group meetings with kids, either in classes or small groups? And because this is, by the way, just what I'm describing what myself and our admin teams used to do, where you go into classroom settings and you meet with every kid in the school, but in small groups, and you engage them with, hey, welcome to the school year. Here's some of the expectations. What are you hoping to get out of this year? what are the things that you want to accomplish this year? And then you relate that feedback to the things that are common expectations that we have together. That can be a whole lot different than just here's the rules, now go to class.
Right.
So I love that idea that really what you're asking when you're thinking about boundaries is what are the norms, the protocols, the processes, and the procedures that we can all agree upon are going to be the most helpful for us to do school.
Right. And if you said this question came from people who may soon be moving into the principalship, the best perspective I can provide is don't solve a problem that doesn't exist and alienate your staff. So as an example, let's say I'm an assistant principal and I'm going to step into principal role next year and I am a very busy mom and I just can't take phone calls over the weekend unless it's an emergency. I think it would be a mistake to go into my first staff meeting and say, now, no phone calls over the weekend unless it's an emergency. Because I might be looking at a staff that was like, I would never call you on a weekend unless it was an emergency. I would never do that. And so what you're doing there is unintentionally insulting a staff by treating them like children. I'm going to need you to do this and this and this. So I think especially if you're new taking over a building, don't solve a problem that doesn't exist. And I
Mm.
would say that to veteran principals too. If it's not a problem, you don't need to address it. I would say that to teachers. You know, you don't need to set a norm that we raise our hand to use the restroom unless you have a bunch of students who don't raise their hand before they ask to use the restroom, because setting a bunch of rules that aren't necessary or that people already know can make you look out of touch. And so I really like your approach where you go into small groups and you say, what do we both need out of this? And you might say, hey, there's three things that are just non-negotiable. It's kind of just what we do here. Here's what they are. But then, those should be general enough that you aren't assuming people don't know how to be reasonable human beings.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, listeners. I mean, we, even in those settings where we're seeking engagement and trust and relationship building, we still had policies and procedures and things that every kid had to receive and had to sign that they did. And I mean, we did our due diligence. And, um, but it reminds me, Jen, of, I'm just going to use Harry Wong, who recently passed away. In his book, First Days of School was so helpful in shaping my first years as a teacher. And one of the things that he taught in that book was just how to keep those expectations and boundaries simple. And so one of the things I would ask my students to do as a teacher was to tell me, what are the things that they want to get out of learning together. But we would try to, um, for lack of a better word, boil them down to the most simple takeaways we could. And I'm just going to use this as an example, but usually at the beginning of a school year, for instance, I would write three phrases on the board or I'd place them in my room: pay attention, participate, and be respectful. And then I would ask, okay, based on what you hope to experience in this educational setting this year, how does those expectations fit within those categories? Every day we're paying attention, every day we're participating, every day we're showing respect. And I can't think of any behavior you could describe that won't fit into one of those categories in some way.
It's funny you say that. I had a friend who, his classroom rules, there were three, and they were so well received that the entire school adopted them. This was probably 20 years ago, and it
Mm.
still works. And it was work hard, be nice, do the right thing. And anything from a classroom behavior infraction to a big deal that ended up with, where the word suspension and expulsion were used, you could say to the student, what was it? Didn't work hard, weren't very nice, didn't do the right thing. So we're saying the same thing. I think it can be very basic and it can be in language that everyone from age 3 to 83 understands. Work hard, be nice, do the right thing. And the three that you mentioned too. So we don't have to overthink it and we don't have to solve problems that don't exist. But the original question along the lines of boundaries, I think what we really mean is how are we going to treat one another? And we want the respect, we want the equity, and we don't want the escalating tensions. That was the second part of the question. So
Yeah.
so why don't you dig into that a little bit?
Well, I want to add one more thought to the
Sure.
setting clear boundaries before we move forward, because what I don't want to have communicated is what I'm not saying.
Right.
So what I'm not saying is that you don't need to be clear in what those expectations are, because clarity is kindness. We've said that many times on the show. But and so I'm going to put myself back in the position of a teacher, back in the position of an administrator, and back in the position of a student, all the people that you're serving in school leadership. And I have to be, I can, because all of us have been on the other end of good teaching and instruction and leadership, and bad teaching, instruction, and leadership. And I'm going to say that pretty consistently over the years that I was on the receiving end and on the giving end, um, leaders or educators who are clear usually gained a whole lot more respect from the people who they were serving. And so, and I'm going to use a former superintendent, Rick Thomas, as an example because I admire him so much. He's retired now, but when I was serving as a principal, Rick was the last superintendent with whom I served, and we worked together for several years. And I remember every single new school year when we bring the admin teams back, Rick would hold a meeting, and he would welcome us all back. And I remember he started every year off the same way, Jen. He would say, "Hey, let me talk about my goals and aspirations for this year. And I also just want to remind you what my expectations for you are as leaders." And I would have the same emotional response every single time in my head. I would go, "Oh man, not again. Rick, you do this every year. I mean, I've known you now for so long. I know what you're probably going to say, it would only take like maybe 2 minutes into him doing that suddenly I would get clarity again. I'd be like, oh, I forgot that that's an expectation, or I forgot that's something he really prioritizes. And I found myself being that student again, just going, you know what? I respect the fact that you're starting off reminding us that this is where we're going. This is what I want. This is where we're heading. And so it's okay also to give yourself permission to just be clear and
Right.
realize that even though our human, I don't know, nature is resistant to clarity, we all still need it, if it's
Right.
done with the right heart and attitude. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Over 1 million teachers use IXL in their classrooms every day for one reason. They love it. Why? IXL is where the magic happens. With just one platform, teachers can personalize learning for every student. IXL gives teachers all the tools they need to enhance and differentiate instruction without adding work to their plates. Plus, IXL has decades of expertise and is proven to be effective. Studies on more than 70,000 schools across 45 states show that those who use IXL outperform others on state tests. Ready to bring the magic to your school? Visit ixl.com/PM to learn more. Are you ready for a tool that can help you elevate engagement and foster a culture of care and connection within your organization while also saving you time? Introducing Libra, your gateway to turning those culture building insights into action. Discover how Libra transforms the way you engage with your team. Imagine integrating all your engagement efforts with platforms like Outlook or Gmail into one seamless experience. With Libra, you focus on people, not software. Celebrate the achievements that make your team unique, from personal milestones to professional accomplishments. Ensure you and your team have the means to meet their connection goals, fostering a workplace where everyone feels valued and understood. Don't let another day pass where engagement is just another item on your to-do list. With Libra, embark on a journey to increase efficiency, improve engagement, and cultivate a caring workplace. Ready to see the difference? Request a demo today at librahq.com. That's LEBRAHQ.com, and take the first steps towards a workplace where everyone feels connected and cared for. Libra, where engagement meets genuine care.
Right, exactly. And repeating information provides that clarity. Even if we've heard it, sometimes it's a good review. And so when I think about those expectations, you never want to frame them in a way that isolates you, so that you're it's a situation where you're seen as out of touch
Mhm,
with the real work. And my sense is that the superintendent you're talking about was very in tune to the real work, but still, we need to meet these expectations.
mhm. Okay, now the second part of that question is, um, the question was asked, what strategies can be employed to set clear boundaries in a professional setting, both as a new leader and in interactions with others to ensure respect and equity without escalating tension. So I want to just park on that second part for a little bit too. Um, and I know you and I love to wordsmith here. So, um, ensuring respect and equity without escalating tensions. What are some of the thoughts coming to your mind?
Well, again, respect is the very tricky thing about respect is you can't ask for it.
Mhm.
You have to have it given or earned or whatever you want to say. And equity, I think in this context means fairness, treating people in a way that they deserve and that will make them want to come to work or want to come to school. And I think there's a risk with boundary setting or attempts to gain respect and be equitable, where we eliminate ongoing communication. And what that means is people won't communicate with you, right? They'll say, okay, well, I'm not going to be heard, or what I have to say doesn't fit with the protocol that's been set or whatever. So we have to be really careful that that's not what we get, because it's certainly not what we want. As I said earlier, we never want to create a situation where we're seen as untouchable or out of touch. Both of those are no good. So I think it's about taking time to think about what you need as a leader. Think about what you might not be getting or that you're worried you won't get. And maybe the answer to that is respect. Maybe I'm worried people aren't going to respect me. Well, wow, we got to dig into that. What behaviors you might put forth that would diminish respect? Or if you're worried that people won't see you as equitable or fair. Okay, well, let's talk about a scenario where that might not where equity might not be the first thing people think of. Again, I don't think it's smart to solve a problem that doesn't exist, but if those are the worries, you've really got to dig into them and kind of play out what the fear is there.
Yeah. For some reason, I'm stuck on this word tensions. To ensure respect and equity without escalating tensions, because both of those are power. Both of those are really both of those words hold a lot of meaning. So you're right, Jen. If the concern is earning respect of others, that doesn't happen first unless you're demonstrating respect for other people. So the way
Right.
you model respect is going to often be the way that people show you respect. When it comes to equity, I think a lot of times people use that word as a substitute for fairness, or really they may be thinking more holistically in terms of making sure that everybody here gets served in the ways that they deserve. But I'm going to add this, that if you think you're going to do that without escalating tensions, then you may be misunderstanding the importance of tensions. This is the same question I have to answer when people ask me about, do you believe that in such a thing as balance? And I'll always say to them, well, I don't really like the word balance, but I will say this: you can't even achieve balance without tension. I can't ride a bike unless there's constant tension happening in order for me to balance on that ride. And I believe the same thing exists in school leadership. You're always going to be stepping into tensions between people's opinions and personalities, or their definitions of right or wrong, or whatever that is. Welcome to life. And
Well,
and and if you think you're going to do any of this with the absence of tension, then you just work in a place where no people exist.
yes, you live in a dream world. Right. Tension. And I think about the word tension the same way I think about anxiety. People want to live in an anxiety-free world. That does not exist. It simply doesn't, because anxiety at its core is a call to action, right? Your body or the situation is saying, "Hey, act, do something." The exact same thing with tensions. A tension means, okay, there's a push, there's a pull. There's something here that's uncomfortable. And I used to be really I wanted to avoid tension. I wanted everything to be great all the time. Now I have evolved to the point where I will even say, okay, I sense some tension here. Let's talk about that. How are you feeling? How are you feeling? Where was the disconnect? So you can even use the word tension in a conversational approach to talking about the tension. Doesn't mean it's going to go away, but it's like you said, with any sort of push pull. I think about a teeter totter, right? An elementary school teeter totter. There's the up, there's the down, there's the creaking of the lever. There's push pull, there's movement. All of those things make for a really fun ride if you know how to manage the tension and you don't let it get out of control. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, tension is a good thing.
Yeah. So maybe it would be helpful for us to think about and leaders to think about the difference between tension and toxic.
Mhm.
Because I think sometimes we're describing one we sometimes you do work in situations where things are toxic.
Yep.
There's a difference between that and tension. Tension is not always a bad thing. In fact, I think it's actually a healthy thing. You and I both know that, like in education, 101, that first you have to disrupt thinking before new thinking can be
Mhm.
adapted, which is why in a classroom setting, you kind of have to push students to think, to challenge their thinking or to ask hard questions to create that curiosity for them to do that next thing. And so that's good tension. But that's different than toxic behavior. And what I don't want to be is a toxic leader, and what I don't want to do is cultivate toxic behaviors. So I don't know if that's a helpful distinction.
I think it is because I don't want any listener to walk away thinking, "Oh, Will and Jen don't get it." There's tension that's truly making my work unmanageable, and I shouldn't just think of it like a teeter totter, right? We're not saying that, and also let me amend what I said. Anxiety can be debilitating. When I didn't mean to blow off that, there can be really negative manifestations of both of those words, but I think what we're both saying is productive tension is a good thing. And
Yeah.
we can sit in it and even name it. Say, "Oh boy, this feels like a tense conversation. What's our outcome again?" Just no, name and own a disparate opinions or approaches, and revisit your outcome to see what you want out of it. And so, back to the question, I think the question was, how can we lead in a way that ensures respect and equity without escalating tensions? We
Mm,
don't want it to escalate to the point of confrontation. You and I talked about that a couple
yeah.
months ago.
Yeah.
If it comes um, to where someone is so upset that it's not a productive conversation, that's when you step in and say, okay, we're not getting anywhere right now, but we're gonna I'm gonna assign a couple of things that we're gonna think about, and then we'll come back next week or whatever it is. You don't want it to escalate to the point of being unproductive.
Yeah. I'm remembering this another great quote from Brene Brown, where she uses the acronym BIG, BIG, and talks about the importance of when you set healthy and appropriate boundaries, you can work more within your integrity so that you can be more generous in the way that you work with others. So, you know, boundaries create integrity, create generosity. And the whole concept there, and of course she's talking about human behavior and not just in schools, but in life in general. The concept there is that sometimes we have to say no, or sometimes we have to um, let other people communicate to other people like this, the directions they should or shouldn't go. And I think the fear I hear in this question was, well, how do I set appropriate boundaries without ticking people off, or making them angry? And so talk about that for a moment, Jen.
As you were talking, I'm thinking about a principal I once mentored who said, "Well, I told my staff I don't check email on weekends." And I said to her, "You that's an okay boundary. You didn't need to say that. Just don't check. It's fine." But the fact that you said it to a staff of 75 people, every one of them probably thought, "Wait, my principal doesn't check email on weekends?" And none of them probably had any intention of sending an email that needed a response on a Saturday afternoon. But the fact that she said it again made her seem out of touch. It made her seem untouchable. It made her
Mhm.
seem like, this is my rule. And while you guys are all working on a Saturday, don't email me because I'm not going to check it. She didn't mean that, but she was just trying to set boundaries. And so I think sometimes we can have, my point to all this is sometimes we can have boundaries that no one even knows about. There are personal boundaries. My husband's an athletic director. He puts his phone away once all the events for the evening are done. He puts his phone away. He puts it upstairs. That's his boundary. He did not have a meeting with his coaches where he said, I put my phone away at 9 o'clock, so don't even bother. It's his own personal silent, that's the end of my day. So we can create those boundaries, norms, practices, whatever word we want to say, in a way that keeps us healthy and protects our staff too, without making it seem like, here's the way I'm going to roll. I don't care what you all do, but this is who I am. We have to be careful with that.
That's so good, Jen. And again, having everything that we're saying has to be taken within the context that um, the place you're in, the person you are, the time that you live in, the people with whom you work, all require nuance
Right.
and different responses. And so none of the things that Jen and I ever say are to try to prescribe to you all of the ways that you should be operating in leadership. Instead, these are just the thoughts that we have in terms of experience, but also um, things we've learned the hard way. And so I want to say this as we wrap up, Jen, that setting clear boundaries, um, sometimes those boundaries have to be direct. I'll give you an example. In the school office, for instance, I trained my secretaries on, and we just did this purposefully because we were having such a hard time knowing how to manage phone calls. So we just kind of sat down and modeled, okay, let's pretend this is the phone call coming in, and how do you respond in a way to the parent that helps guide them towards the best answers, or to someone who can answer the question other than me every time. And so that wasn't because I'm never available. It was just because we're trying to create this atmosphere where people can be pointed to the place that's really going to help them. And
Right.
I can be free to do the things that only I can do, because that my secretary can't go observe and evaluate teachers, but I can. And so sometimes those boundary settings means that you roll up your sleeves and you sit down with people and you train them to
Right.
use you how you want to be used, and you show them and you model for them. It's not just a list of to-dos or a list of key responsibilities, which those can help too. There's lots of different ways you can do this, but I think the heart of what we're trying to communicate here is that by inviting people into that process of how do you want this place to be, what are the norms we want all to live by, and figuring out what are the simple phrases that we can attach to those behaviors, and then we begin to model those things over time, then we create clearer boundaries than if we're just winging it. So I
Right.
don't know if that's helpful, Jen, but I sure have enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, it's a great conversation, and I do want to make one tie back to something we talked about months ago. We talked about systems. And so many times when we feel let down or as if others have failed us, it's a problem with the system. And I'm thinking about a district I worked with 2 summers ago, and they were just besieged by parent emails for an event they were having. And what it led to, and really this is a question about boundaries. How could teachers possibly teach and principals possibly principal if there's 75 emails coming in a day? So they created a frequently asked questions page for this big event, and then they created an automatic a Google form where people could put their questions. And so it went to one person, because what that community had done is when they had a question about the event, they emailed 5 people, and then 5 people were spending time on that response. And sometimes they were conflicting, which created social media posts about how this district was such a mess. So my point is sometimes setting boundaries means training an entire community how to um how to act or not even how to act. That's very insulting. Training them the best way to get an outcome. So if the problem is the system, then that's what you go after. You create a system and you get a couple people together and say, how can we fix this? So that's going to be the last thing I say about it, but it just triggered that memory of us talking about systems that sometimes just make people better.
Well, Principal Matters listeners, if you're listening to this at the time of its release, some of you are wrapping up a year, some of you are stepping into summer, some of you may be listening to this as an archived episode. Whatever time you're in, thank you for caring deeply enough to listen and learn with us. And if you have questions that you'd like Jen or I to jump on or respond to, feel free to email us at will@williamdparker.com or jen@jenschwanke.com. Jen, thank you so much for this opportunity to learn with you, and Principal What Matters listeners, thank you for doing what matters, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Talk soon.
You can find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academies, Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations from my books, as well as from Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.